actually also pitched things forward to things that we'll be talking about later this afternoon and tomorrow, about especially on areas like non-communicable diseases. There's an increasing recognition that patients, consumers, are going to be looking at their grocery store, at their pharmacies for ways to treat themselves, to prevent things. In the Commission's upcoming cardiovascular disease plan, we know that indeed the types of products people just buy in the grocery store are going to be a major focus. And of course, we're going to be talking about AI, people talking to Dr. ChatGPT to get health advice. That, of course, also has major implications for what types of products are available over the counter. So I'm glad we could have that discussion, but continuing on our theme, there's so much legislation, so much going on. The Critical Medicines Act we just talked about before, the Life Sciences Strategy, the Biotech Act, the revision of the Clinical Trials Regulation. It feels like everything, everywhere, all at once. And we're going to keep repeating this line that Sandra Galina says throughout the conference. We have no time to lose. That's what she said to kind of, say we don't always need impact assessments for all these things. Everyone is rushing to shape these bills. And the big question remains, how will they all fit together and will they deliver real results? My colleague Rory O'Neill will bring you up to speed on the future of life sciences with his excellent lineup. Please make some noise as Rory and speakers make their way to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Very nice to be with you. My name's Rory O'Neill. I'm a healthcare reporter at Politico. And for the next 40 minutes or so, or 35 minutes, excuse me, we're going to be talking about how Europe can maximize the potential of its life sciences industry. So, announcing the EU Life Sciences Strategy in July, Health Commissioner Oliver Varhelyi said Europe had all the tools it needed to become the innovation hub for healthcare. The ultimate aim, it's an ambitious one, is that Europe will be the most attractive place for life sciences in the world by 2030. To do that, the Commissioner argues, Europe needs a major and urgent overhaul of how we regulate. So to tell us what Europe needs to do to lead the way in life sciences, I'm very pleased to be joined by a terrific panel of speakers. So here to my left, we have Joanna Drake, Deputy Director General at DG RTD from the European Commission. We have Natalie Mall, Director General of the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations. That's the hard bit out of the way. And finally, Sonia Marjanovic, Director for Healthcare, Innovation, Industry and Policy at RAND Europe. You're all very welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. So, whenever the Commissioner has spoken about the plight of Europe's life sciences industry, he really tends to stress the urgency of fixing the EU regulatory system. As Sandra Galina said this morning, it's Varhelyi's urgency on this issue that is really driving the Commission to simplify EU regulations before Christmas without an impact assessment, if needs be. So my first question, Sonia, I might start with you on this. Is the Commissioner right that the system is broken? And whether excessive regulation means Europe is at risk falling further behind the US and China?
That's a really good question. So I think, as we heard throughout the day, the system, the foundations may be in place, but there's significant challenges to overcome. I think there is an urgency to tackle this, and I'll say a little bit more about that, but even more important than the urgency is getting it right, so that whatever we do ends up being sustainable. We've heard about a number of strategies and policy initiatives this morning, and really it's about how the nexus of policy initiatives come together, be that the Biotech Act or the Life Sciences Strategy or Clinical Trials Regulation or HTA regulation or the Startup and Scale-Up Strategy. And the devil's in the detail. The devil's really in the implementation detail. So I think from my perspective, there are a few pillars that really need to come together. We need to look at this as a systemic challenge. They have to do with R&D funding, they have to do with data, they have to do with the workforce, with regulation and HTA, supply chains, and of course, affordability and access. I can't go through all of that in the short time that we have, but maybe I'll just start and briefly comment on the funding for R&D and on the data aspects, because I think these are particularly important for us to touch on a bit more today. So we've already talked about geopolitics, increasing challenges to public expenditure on R&D. We have competition with defense budgets. We have the risk that US tariffs will have trickle-down effects on national budgets, including budgets for health and innovation. And this can affect the European Commission and European-level financing as well. But we know that public funding is absolutely essential for de-risking R&D, for providing stimulus, for attracting private sector investment. Then if we look at venture capital, it still remains much harder to gain access to venture capital in Europe than in the US, and the APAC region is becoming increasingly competitive. We did a study a few years back with partners which showed that it was 3 times easier to get access to VC capital in the APAC region, and deal sizes were also longer and of larger values. So this is a major challenge. We also face challenges of long-term growth capital needed for scaling, so I'm particularly pleased to see the attention to the startup and scale-up strategy. And then, if we look at pharma spending on R&D, and I'm sure Natalie can say more to that, but growth in Europe has been about, according to FPO data, I think 4.4% annually, compared to 5.5% in the US and 20.7% in China. So this is really serious. We need to think about this if we want to keep the pharma industry in the UK. But looking ahead, and on a more positive note, we are seeing the life sciences strategies proposing a series of actions that could strengthen public funding and could make Europe more competitive. So there's proposals to double the budget for the Horizon Europe program from 95 to 175 million. Not all of that would, of course, go to life sciences, but a significant chunk would. There's a lot of focus and a lot of potential for more coordinated finance, multi-country trials, better network centers of excellence, biotech clusters, ATMP clusters, and a lot of investment in AI. But what I really want to emphasize is the need for long-term growth capital that's needed for scaling. And we haven't heard much discussion about the role that the European Investment Bank could play here. It's encouraging that the startup and scale-up strategy is looking at a Scale-up Europe fund, multi-billion fund, seeking to mobilize private sector investment. But the devil is in the detail. Lots of good proposals, but will they pan out? I'd like to say a bit on data, but maybe I should pause briefly.
We can come back to it.
That would be great.
Natalie, I might bring you in on this. Is Commissioner Varhelyi right that this is a do-or-die moment for the life sciences industry, and is excessive regulation the problem, or is there more to it than that?
Do you know, I think Mario Draghi said it the year before, even Varelli said it. So Commissioner Varelli is right, and Mario Draghi already said it last year. So I don't think it's like a sudden aha moment. I think it was very clear in the report, the Draghi report, that pharma was one of the 9 sectors that needed attention urgently, and we're late, because very little of what was asked, very, very few of the solutions that were put forward by Mario Draghi have actually been implemented. So because it takes a long time, I'm not pointing figures, I'm just saying the urgency is there because the diagnosis was already made several times also by Mario Draghi. So I think now there is, our president in FPA has a 3A, which is very easy to think about. It's attract, accelerate, and access. So attract investment, attract SMEs, accelerate from research to products, and then give access to patients. And that is the easiest way for me to think about what we need to do in Europe very quickly. So I think Commissioner Varelli is doing what Mario Draghi has suggested the European Commission does, which is focus on one of the many industrial pillars that is the basis for our health security, but also our economic security in Europe, as COVID taught us rather well just a few years ago.
Joanna, does DG or TD share Commissioner Varhelyi's urgency on this? Is this something we need to fix before Christmas, as he seems convinced it is?
Absolutely. That is, I think, recognized through the, I would say, deluge of strategies that have been prepared this year. And we now have to translate that into action, because it's not only about positioning, as has already been said, Europe as being the most attractive place for life sciences by 2030, which is like tomorrow, but it's about the bold action. And I think the life science strategy, which, as you know, already was like 20 years ago, already somehow carved out, but maybe not acted upon in alignment between the member states and all the regulatory authorities, the investment community, and also the industry. Enough. So I think now there is much more of a recognition that this is a problem that unless we really face it full frontally, it's not going to go away. And this is why the life science strategy is like the umbrella structure that has put about the ingredients that have been mentioned already by the previous speaker of the investment journey required. And it needs to be the whole value chain. Of course, including the health sector, and this is what we're talking about today. So not only do we need to have the foundations there for what is actually driving even the proposal of the budget, as you know, for the next budget of the Commission, which is competitiveness. So we need to lay the foundations and having an ecosystem that is solely driven by ensuring Europe's competitiveness and really addressing that. But also, it's about the speed, going from lab to market very quickly, and then making sure that the patient actually has access to this care. So does it actually solve the problem? I wouldn't say that it solves the problem, but I think it sets a very clear and determined path with very clear milestones that need to be also achieved. I would say even before Christmas, if possible. But of course, we know that this is not going to be, clicking of your finger. So there are other accompanying, not strategies, but actions now, including not only the money, and I hope as well that the EIB also will step up, but also private investment will step up and accompany all the way. But other actions, like for instance on the clinical research investment plan, as you know, there's a biotech, and I think Sandra Galina spoke broadly about that this morning already, that it will incorporate many of the issues that need to be really tackled very, very granularly, like for clinical trials, like for advanced therapy medicinal products, for instance, in order to boost competitiveness in the area. We know that Europe already is well positioned in the world market, but it's really, really on the brink of losing it all if we don't get our act together even before Christmas.
Yeah, I mean, sticking with the life sciences strategy for a moment, the Commission has set a very high bar for this to succeed. I mean, the ambition is to be the world leader in life sciences. I think one thing that some people are asking is whether the money on the table is really enough to deliver on that. For example, that the Commission says it's going to stimulate innovation in areas like climate change, adaptation, next generation vaccines, affordable cancer drugs, and it's going to support dedicated calls with 300 million euro. I understand that's to be coupled with regulatory reform. It's not the only thing the Commission is doing. But are these kind of sums enough to really power Europe into a leadership position against the likes of China and the US?
I would say it is. We are already having strong cards in so many of the areas that you have mentioned. I mean, we, as you know, with the startup and scale-up strategy, we have the slogan. It's not just a slogan, but we put our money where our mouth is as well with the Choose Europe possibilities. But I think we have very strong cards. It's not just having the cards, though. It's just that we need to speed up and we need to be much more aligned, I think, collectively. So this is really a call for action for all the players to really come together. And I think it is really a unique opportunity, and I would say never too late. But I think we can, very much lose the ground if we don't do it well. So we need to really think about our goal as being setting up the powerhouse that is Europe. But there are the challenges, and we need to acknowledge the challenges. And the challenges are the regulatory procedures, the fragmentation. We have funding issues. We have, the ecosystem. Where, for instance, why do we still talk about death valleys in Europe? Why do we still? It's the ecosystem, which obviously is not joined up enough. And also, I think the access to infrastructure, especially in the health sector, where clinical trials, and can be very costly, are concerned. As you know, in the proposal as well for the next MFF, there is also within the Horizon Europe the fourth pillar, which is actually proposing that there could be up to 20%, which is also European money for infrastructures, for research infrastructures. So I think you know, the coming together sometimes has to go also beyond maybe where the European Union has competencies itself, and therefore it needs to have really strong and joined up alliances with the legal systems, in other words, that need to themselves align to really create the internal market and make it much simpler. So I think the simplification driver, together with the competitiveness one are really what's driving this. And I think it's a real realization of going granular, but growing granular in a serious way and really sticking to our words.
I think you both want to jump in on that. Sonia, I saw you first, and then we'll go to Natalie.
I just wanted to pick up on the point about speeding things up and how important that is, and I think that's absolutely right. I think the challenge we face is not so much with setting up platforms that can allow things to speed up, but with national enforcement and kind of more consistent national interpretation of what needs to happen. So with the clinical trials regulation streamlining, great move, but there were both technical problems with the platform and there were challenges with local interpretation. Similarly, if we look at the EMA and the effort to reduce the regulatory review timeline from 210 to 180 days, that's very, very welcome. I'm hoping we can go further with time. But again, most reimbursement decisions, not for all medicines, but most are still made at member state levels. So really, it's how Europe Central and the Commission will work with member states to make sure that this all pans out as intended, that I think we need to think about.
So I'm not going to repeat what either of you said, which is exactly correct. I'm just going to add the other piece of the puzzle, which is even if we got all the regulatory things perfectly, even if we had a really good IP, if we don't have a whole system that can welcome the innovation and an actual market that attracts innovation, and the doctors and the nurses, by the way, not even talk about workforce, the infrastructures in hospitals that can make sure that innovation reaches patients, this will not be an attractive environment for innovation. So today we are in a moment where, as you said, Joanna, and you as well, Sonia, we really all have to work together to make sure that chain from the very beginning, from the bench in a university all the way to the patient is as attractive as possible. You cannot have just one piece that works. So again, it's that attracting with the right funds. The value of death is 30 years. We talk about value of death. It's becoming really urgent to fix that. But then the regulatory systems that we have all the right ideas, but even, and I would say really the IP factor is not an non-important factor right now, since other regions are gearing up to give more IP to attract more. But then that market reality, the fact that in Europe we need to say, do we want innovation or not, and how do we want it? Considering right now we have, as you mentioned at the beginning, Rory, but also Sarah mentioned, the defense, the real tug of war between defense and health. So you have to defend, but you also have to protect your population. So I think the two should not be tugging at each other, but they should be considered in unison. And how do we make sure that we defend and protect Europe in the right way for the future? Difficult. Not saying we have any solutions, but I think the attention, the urgency, and the joined up forces are really a great signal.
If I may maybe come in on this one, and both the previous speakers spoke about the speed and also the innovation environment, if you like. And I think the messages that we have been giving so far, no wonder, people go to China and the US maybe more readily, is that we're not joined up enough. And I think this is a real issue, especially in the medical field, because if for innovation, especially in the medical field, they really need to scale up, especially when there are, the trials are good and it's encouraging. They really need to scale up very, very quickly. And I think at the moment, not only is it not quick, but it's very costly and it's also very burdensome. Plus, depending where you have tested it, you would also have to do the adjustments which are themselves costly. So very unattractive due to this fragmentation. So at the moment, for instance, the medical device regulation is being looked at for this purpose, and also the Biotech Act. Again, I wouldn't like to go to that because I know that this morning you spoke about it already, but it's already presuming, because it's under this big umbrella of the life science strategy, that it needs to really make the innovation environment really a welcome one and really there to stay. So I think, even for instance, intellectual property and the opportunities for public-private partnerships, we in DG RTD have quite a lot of experience here with public-private partnerships, even in the pharma sector. And I think, everybody agrees that this has been a great instrument for us to be in a position to work with stakeholders in the pre-competitive stage in order to, really align positions and not obviously and compete later on the market. But I think this is exactly the environment that we really need to multiply and we really need to make much more robust in order to be the sort of visiting card, if you like, of the innovation environment in Europe. But not only with regulators and boxes. I think it's all about the investment journey, as I said, that money needs to be also available and accessible along the value chain.
Well, I was going to ask about intellectual property, because the strategy mentions the affordability of new cancer solutions, for example, something the Commission wants to support. How is the Commission going to ensure those drugs are affordable? And do you think there's a tension between the aim to make sure the drugs are accessible and that patients can benefit from wide access to new life sciences innovation, and also the Commission, stated aim to support innovation, grant the necessary incentives to industry? Is there a tension there? And what steps is the Commission going to take to ensure those drugs are affordable?
Well, I mean, if innovation, especially in the health sector, doesn't lead to access of that therapy to the patients and affordability, I think, it's not really reaching its purpose. At the end of the day, if we look at what we have been working with in the last 5 years with the Cancer Mission, which still has another 5 years to go. I think, the mission statement of the Cancer Mission says it all. It says that the main aim of the Cancer Mission is to ensure that by 2030, it would have made better lives, created better lives for 3 million patients. Now, how do you measure that? One of them is for sure accessibility. We found out that Europe has a key role to play in ensuring the equity in the access, not only to timely diagnostics, but also to the actual therapy. And when you look and survey how far this is not equitable in Europe, you'll be surprised. And I'm not suggesting that member states are abandoning their duties. It's just that sometimes there isn't enough infrastructure, there isn't enough capacity to actually do in a timely manner. So what can Europe do about that? I think it can do a lot through simple alignment, like we have done with the Cancer Mission, in order to make sure that, for instance, with the cancer comprehensive centers that the Cancer Mission has helped also to set up and to sustain, but also the national cancer hubs, and also the research institutes that are working much more together on what needs to be done and where it needs to be done and how it's actually distributed. These are matters that maybe we don't touch upon and we don't go into the granularity of, but I think Europe does have a role to play to leverage these issues as well, together with the stakeholders and together with the patients too.
But on the issue like affordability, like if the Commission is supporting the development of affordable new drugs, like will there be strings attached to that money, for example, to ensure like the price is accessible, for example, or something like that?
Well, I mean, obviously there's always the market, that will decide a large part of that. But of course, I think the, equity has also to do with the affordability of medicines. And I think here again, we can work together with the member states, especially in the upcoming plans of how we can also facilitate the access to certain drugs. But of course, I mean, all of this depends on an ecosystem that's working really together. In the end, I think the price will also reflect through that. And I think we do have an interest to ensure that equity is part of the health agenda as well in the EU.
Natalie?
Yeah, Rory, I just wanted to come in on this because I really think, and FP has been asking for this for a number of years, and maybe this is the right moment. I kind of hoped after COVID would be a right moment to get the stakeholders together, including the member states, to rethink the way healthcare systems operate in general in member states. I think right now that tension that we're having with the budgets, because we're having it, is even more pressing, the global situation, the competitiveness, but really just health security and economic security. Can we sit down and say, okay, what are the obstacles to access? You know, one country waits for 5 other countries to have a price before they can even start the discussion, so that slows things down. There will be lots of different reasons for delays and inequities. And I really think it's incumbent upon all of us, and I have a feeling I said this last year at the same place, but anyway, it's incumbent upon all of us, and I'm seeing people in the audience who are heading organizations that matter to access, to sit down together and say, okay, we need to do it differently. Like, the world is completely different right now. Defense is adding a layer that we never even imagined. How can we keep Europe attractive, make it faster to get products through the system? So we've discussed that a lot. But how do we get the products to the patients as quickly as possible? The new products that are even more, advanced therapies, never mind those, or gene therapy, there's actually cures during clinical trials. I really urge us to be as impatient as the commissioner is on addressing this together, because I think it's our joint responsibility. And I know we try to do it on our own, each of us, in our lane, but right now that's going to take too long and be inefficient. So I hope we can come out of this as well. And I think the Life Science Board is an idea, but maybe there's something more around access that we could really set up at European level that would make a difference quickly.
Another issue we shouldn't overlook is the importance of the workforce. MEP Kulja, unfortunately, who can't be with us today. I know this is a big issue for him, so we'll do it justice in his absence. So the life sciences strategy acknowledges the need to promote upskilling, reskilling, to make research a more attractive career. But Sonia, do you think it's strong enough on action? How critical an issue is the workforce to the success of Europe's life sciences industry?
I'm really glad you asked that. I thought we were talking about everything except for the people, but without the people, we can't go anywhere. So I think it's absolutely critical. And actually, some of the initiatives in the startup and scale-up strategy that are discussed, like the Blue Carpet initiative, I think is exciting. Actually, quite a few reflections there. So what is promising is the focus on building up more entrepreneurial skills, but I think we can't confine that sort of training to business schools. Not everyone who finishes medicine will be an entrepreneur, but more people need to be sensitized to entrepreneurship to understand what it's about. I think efforts to make it more acceptable and easier for academics to engage with commercialization of research are also very welcome. Of course, there's the need to sort out tax obstacles for cross-border employees. There's the need to become quicker and leaner with visas to attract talent, work permits, even the EU Blue Card Directive that's looking at non-EU workers, that's also important. But I'd like to actually situate this in a bigger picture context. We obviously, everyone knows we face growing competition for talent, including with the APAC region. I think the Commission itself said that 75% of US doctoral graduates stay in the US after finishing their PhDs. That dynamic might change with funding cuts in the US, but it's a serious issue. But when we look, what's different about the time we're in now than the time we used to be in? I think firstly, scientific fields are converging. So it's no more about bioscience. It's about bioscience plus IT plus data plus AI plus quantum. So I think any efforts to train the workforce of the future, it's not a quick fix. We'll really need to deal with this convergence and be much more multidisciplinary. We also see the pace of change being so rapid, especially if we look at data and AI. So I don't think we can think about kind of one-off reform of curricula in life sciences. I think we need to really look at a life course approach where we're building continual professional development opportunities, life course training approaches, constant upskilling. So I think those are two things I wanted to flag. And I guess the last thing is about porous boundaries between academia and industry. There's so much to be learned, not only about science and the topics of R&D, but really about ways of working and efficiency and productivity if we have movement of the workforce between academic research institute and industry settings. So I'd like to see a bit more of that come into play.
Just before we go, I did want to ask quickly on the Biotech Act. So what does the split of the Biotech Act into two parts? What does that mean for DG or TD? Are you feeding in on both parts? Are you leaning more heavily on one than the other?
Well, I think that is still, the jury is still out on that one, in the sense that I'm not sure how clear it is, what the Biotech 1 will address as opposed to Biotech 2. I think that is still the subject of internal discussions, as far as I understand. And we're definitely not leading on any one of those, but we are collaborating, of course, with the services who are leading.
It doesn't sound like part 1 will have an impact assessment if we're to get it out before Christmas. In fact, the Commission has said it won't. Should part 2 have an impact assessment? We've got a bit more of a runway to work with there.
We have to know what part 2 will have before I can actually have an opinion on that one. But I mean, well, we'll have to wait and see, I suppose.
All right, stay tuned. So, sure, listen, we could go on forever, but we are running out of time, I'm afraid. And we have Emer Cook of the European Medicines Agency coming up, and we can't keep her waiting. So stay tuned for that interview. I will see you later. Thanks a million, and please give a round of applause for our speakers.
Thank you.
Indeed, as Rory said, we have Emer Cook coming up next. But first, I just want to get a little sense of the audience. From that last panel, were you convinced? Raise your hand if you think it's realistic to believe that Europe is on track to be the world leader in life sciences by 2030. If yes, raise your hand. Ooh, guys. Okay, fair enough. I can't blame you. So the other question, of course, we're not confident in the room. The other question is if patients will be confident in the safety and the efficacy of all these new innovations. This is all giving me flashbacks to our 2020 summit. That was our post-COVID, in the middle of COVID summit. And that was the first time I interviewed Emer Cook. It was shortly after she became executive director of the European Medicines Agency. I was standing all alone on a stage in an empty room at AutoWorld talking to her over Zoom. So really glad to have you here, really glad to have her here. And back then, we were in a race for vaccines. And Cook's challenge was to show that emergency assessments could be fast and credible. And so this discussion is also triggering a much more recent flashback, a Politico event I moderated just a few weeks ago on the Biotech Act. MEP Christian Vigenin made a strong point that policies mean little without public acceptance. In today's polarized context, science-based evidence and trust are more crucial than ever. But the dialogue has only gotten more heated since that first Politico Health Summit interview with Emer Cook. I'll be curious to hear how she thinks it's going with Helen Collis for this year's discussion. Please join us.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Rory, for the previous very interesting discussion on the life sciences sector in Europe. I'm Helen Collis, I'm health editor at Politico, and I'm delighted to see out the end of the morning sessions with an interview with Emer Cook, Executive Director of the European Medicines Agency.